Hello, everyone. Welcome to Auditoria's Priorities, Trends, and Challenges, What's Going On in the Office of the CFO. Super excited here today. Thank you for joining us. And I'll be asking the panel some questions around these topics, priorities, trends, and challenges. But I also encourage our listening audience to send in your questions, observations, and insights as well, using the chat box and the Q&A box. So today on our panel, we have Jennifer Halstead, we have Ken Young, and Jack Sweeney. So let's take a moment for a quick intro from each. Let's start with Jennifer.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Halstead. I'm the CFO for Link Labs. We have an asset tracking with a full end-to-end IoT platform. I'm normally located in Northern Virginia. Today, I happen to be in Las Vegas for a conference. Thanks for having me, Elaine.
Excellent. We're so glad to have you here. Ken.
Sure, I'm a credit consultant. Previously, I was credit manager at Pepsi Bottling in Canada. And before that, I was in the salmon growing industry, Stolt Sea Farm, raised salmon around the world. And it's a pleasure to be here today with you, Elaine.
Happy to have you too, Ken. And Jack.
Yes, hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and I am the host and creator of CFO Thought Leader. It's a podcast you can find on Apple or Spotify or Google. We interview finance leaders, and we're discovering how finance leadership is changing and how the role is changing and how the finance function is changing. So tune in sometime, and it's wonderful to be with you.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you. I'm super excited about this panel. I think we're going to have some great discussion today. And again, for all those who are attending the conference, by all means, put questions in the chat box if you have any, and we'll take a look at them as they come in. So without further ado, let's get to our first question that I have today for our panelists. What separates the best finance people from the rest? So again, something along, maybe it's best practices, maybe it's incorporating certain aspects, methodologies. So let's start with Jennifer. What separates the best finance people from the rest?
So I'm always looking for people who are learning, growing, pushing themselves, and want to keep up with trends. Those are some of the qualities I look for in some of the best finance people.
Okay, excellent. Ken, what's your thoughts on this?
Sure. First of all, I would say that I'm thinking back on my career path, and as I think back, I think of a finance manager that really had an impression on me. So I remember in the morning what he would do is he would come into his whole department, a large department. Very first thing he'd do, he'd just go to every individual person and just chat with them for a second or two. Just say, hey, how's it going? Like, to me, it was my first job. I was fairly young. He was a cool boss, and he knew how to set the trend. And I saw in each employee, they would do anything for that boss just because he spent time with them to begin with. But above and beyond my experience, I would say I've read articles recently, and one survey showed that from a study of 195 leaders from around the world in 15 countries and 30 different organizations, they found the top 5 qualities for success were strong ethics and safety, empowering others to self-organize and just set goals and provide clear objectives, have efficient learning, and have the flexibility to change their opinion, nurture growth, which motivates employees, and finally, fostering a sense of connection and belonging and communicating openly. Those are the 5 things in that study that I thought finance people would be separated from the rest of people.
Yeah, and to Jennifer and Ken, both of your points, that's what it talks about to be great leaders and great leadership, and then how do we hone it in on the finance in particular? Jack, do you have thoughts on that? Looking this a little bit more closely from the lens of finance?
Sure. Jennifer and Ken have pointed the direction, but the word that came to mind for me is collaboration. Jennifer shared how the best finance people demonstrate a willingness to learn and grow. Mm-hmm. And while in certain tribal cultures, they have what is called a walkabout, where in order to grow and learn, young people are forced to interact with the larger world. And finance is so similar today because to be successful as a finance professional today, you have to go where the data is. And the fact is, data is everywhere. So you may be tasked with collaborating with the sales team to understand better how customer engagement data can predict customer churn before it happens. Or maybe you're going to be tasked with collaborating with a group of plant managers to help them develop a predictive maintenance type of solution that's data driven. So for instance, large manufacturing equipment that maybe in the past put employee safety at risk, no longer is that the case. In any case, your finance mind, that curious analytical mind, will allow you to take a seat beside the plant managers, beside the salespeople, but it's your ability to collaborate with those seated beside you that is going to set you apart. And that's what I would emphasize.
Excellent points, and thank you for that. So having shared that thought, let's go to our next question. Our next question is going to be, have the priorities on which CFOs focus shifted in the last year? If yes, why? If no, why not? And then Jack, since you were talking about the finance post, let's start with you on this question. So have the priorities on which CFOs focus shifted?
Yeah, and I see there are two primary shifts that we've heard in our discussions with CFOs. The first shift is the move to a digital mindset. What part of this business is not operating digitally, and why? Now, the move to digital was happening all along, but what's really occurred is finance leaders tell us is this acceleration that's gone on during COVID. What part of the business could be leveraging digital tools that currently isn't, and what processes that remain old school can we change right now? So that's part of what I've been hearing. But the second shift is something I've been talking to finance leaders a good deal about, and it's somewhat related to COVID. It's the shift towards the workforce, or rather people. People are increasingly top of mind for finance leaders. And it's interesting, and it's maybe a little ironic because suddenly all these people who populated office corridors are off-site and out of sight. And so now suddenly they're top of mind. But here's the thing, as finance leaders seek to collaborate across the organization, they've never been more aware of how their leadership messaging, their leadership voice, connects with others and connects with people across the enterprise. And they have to connect across the breadth of the enterprise. They're not just talking to their finance and accounting people. So at the same time, and with all the headlines around the Great Resignation, and again, beginning last spring, I think the numbers in April, there was something like 4 million people quit their jobs last April. And we're told, in fact, money had little to do with it. So that's enough to make any finance leader begin reevaluating their talent mindset. Again, finance leaders must connect more broadly with the workforce, and they need to see how they need to see people as individuals more. It's one of the more striking conversations, actually, that we've been having. That leadership voice has to change. And again, because it has to connect with a broader part of the organization and with different types of individuals with different skill sets. So that's what I'd see as a major shift.
So that's so interesting because that echoes what Ken was saying about that one manager you had, Ken, who was coming around to the individual, right? To really give it that personalized attention to each of those people. Super important trait if you want to have the success at an organization. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on priorities? As a CFO, you can really give us some good insight in terms of what happened within you and your organization.
Sure. So, one of the things you were touching on, Jack, and a recent leader told me, it's not what you do, it's everything you do. It's the entire message, together. It's the connection with the employees. It's not just the once a week, here's what we're doing. It's everything I do on a daily basis, communicating that unified message across the company that really makes a difference and it resonates with employees. If I say one thing and I do something else, that message just isn't going to get through. And I think also, even with the last question, Jack, you were touching on, becoming more strategic and collaborative. As CFOs, we are reaching across all parts of the organization, and we're really seeing our priorities shift away maybe from numbers to the entire strategy of the company. And keeping our people safe in that process as we have remote work and people coming in and people getting out and meeting with customers and prospects. How do we keep our people safe? How do we make them feel valued, and really help them do their jobs most effectively?
Yeah, excellent points. And I think when we consider these remote environments, people are moving back to the office. They're now getting out there and sort of being exposed again to what's going on in the world and all the things that are still happening. I think it's also very important to make sure that people have that connection and feel that connectivity. 100% agree. Ken, thoughts on this, the priorities? What have you seen, or what's been your experiences?
Sure, I think Jennifer and Jack have outlined it really well, but I would just add that I think CFOs have recognized that surviving is not enough anymore. It's time to grow their organizations and find efficient ways to do that. And CFOs, like Jennifer and Jack have just said, have to be involved in all phases of that growth. Maybe customer acquisition, new market initiatives, mergers and acquisitions. Even sourcing raw materials nowadays is critical for a company to survive. And through sourcing raw materials through new channels and repositioning the workforce to make it as efficient as it can be. I think another thing, they just need to rebuild the culture of a company throughout the organization. Without a strong culture, the survival of a company is precarious at best. And bringing people together back into the workforce in an office location, even if it's maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week, whatever it be, I think that's critical to rebuild that that camaraderie and that teamwork to make a company successful. I guess the only other thing is that CFOs have learned to create a flexible business model that can react quickly and decisively to conditions if they deteriorate, while also being able to capitalize aggressively on opportunities as they emerge. That's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunities as they emerge. I think it's also an interesting point you make about culture. What do you do when maybe part of your staff is at home and part of your staff is at the office? And so what is it that you do to establish what is the culture of the organization? Because, is it something that has to be an in-person? Is it something that can be a less tangible thing? Maybe it's what, Jennifer, it's everything you do all the time is really how you build that culture as well. So having talked about
that was a good one that Jennifer said. I'm gonna use that as a quote.
Yeah, absolutely. Wrote it down for sure.
It's tricky as we, think about remote work, and I know we're going to touch on this more, but, it's very difficult to find that balance between, how much is completely remote, how much is, a hybrid model. Some companies are moving to that. And as you consider, the costs involved of having, a on-site location or people within a particular geographic area, it's really impacting how we see the workforce and the ability to hire. I'm thinking of one survey PwC just did. Remote work is a top priority for young workers, particularly. 45% of Gen Z and 47% of millennials are looking for the flexibility to be able to work where they want to and be able to relocate. That's compared to 38% of Gen X and 14% of boomers. So we're going to see that really impacting our ability to hire and the future of employment.
Yeah, 100% agree on all that. Isn't that so interesting that there are sort of generational differences as to the preferences? But I do think that regardless, I think we touched on it a couple times, strategy and flexibility are going to be key for what's happening with organizations and in the way that they're conducting their business. So we talked about strategy, focus, flexibility, but now this is a question where if you took out your magic wand, abracadabra, you could magically solve one problem in finance and accounting, what would it be? Ken, let's hear from you on this one. If you could just magically solve, what is the one problem you think that's just absolutely eating away at finance and accounting? And
Well, I think one issue right now that's front burner for CFOs is knowing the specific right route to take post or near post COVID with a return to work format, basically ensuring the health and safety protocols while mirroring the benefits of remote work with efficiency and creativity of face-to-face meetings. Um, I think people vary in how much they value autonomy, achievement, and affiliation, but employers can be sure they got to recognize these psychological resources, and because they matter, each one matters to a different degree to employees. So I think that's probably the front burner issue right now because the companies are starting to get back into that office environment, and they to make that right decision will be key. Like we've talked about losing employees and stuff, and we've also said so many times employees are our best asset. So you don't want to lose that. So I guess that would be my answer.
yes, thank you so much, Ken. And I think employees are our best asset. They are the organization, and they are the ones who are the culture of the organization. I think it always comes back to the people and who you employ. Jennifer, you have thoughts on this one? Magically solve one problem in finance and accounting? What would it be?
Yeah, I'd love a magic wand on this one. I would wish for more time. I think that, as the office of CFO evolves, there's just more and more being put on our plates. We're becoming more involved in operations and how the company's, strategic direction goes. I meet with the heads of all of our departments for a short stand up on a daily basis. We've been talking about collaboration, particularly in a remote environment. That is really important and very helpful across the company just to get that visibility. But it takes time, and it's a commitment. CFOs, we're working on procurement now. Ken, I think you touched on this, the supply chain. The delays that we're seeing in being able to fulfill. I'm having, for example, what I used to be able to get in my warehouse within 120 to 180 days is now taking a year in advance. And just the amount of time to manage that supply chain. Working with sales on the top line, are we going to be hitting that? So, I'm relying on automation and looking for new ways to automate those mundane tasks as much as possible because the plate keeps growing. And, in order to keep that work-life balance, we've got to be able to have automation and new ways to solve, some of those problems and take some of those things off our plate.
Well, you know that where I come from, I'm going to echo your willingness and sort of to say, okay, automation is the key to getting time back. 100% would agree with that, because it just the cost of having your resources spend time on these repetitive, mundane type of administrative clerical work, when that can be put off on some kind of either smart bots or some other kind of automation, and then you can really then focus on some of this more strategic and value-added tasks. It's super important for an organization, and especially ones that are growing and looking to expand, so that you can have that flexibility and scalability of operations, something that automation can really bring and drive for your organization. Jack, do you have any thoughts on solving problems in finance, or like what have you seen? Is there a key problem that you've seen that's bubbled up in your conversations?
I was just struck by what Jennifer quickly mentioned. She talked about how she had to change how she manages, and she had a stand-up meeting or whatever. She brought together parts of the organization to communicate with. And that's just something that we hear over and over again, that finance leaders are really thinking hard about how they deliver the message. And does there need to be different people around the table? Or how do I communicate with that part of the organization over there more effectively, or change the behaviors in that part of the organization? How can that be done in an effective way? And that's just a dialogue that is continuous, but I would say quite loud as the remote environment occurred. So anyway, I just thought that was spot on.
Yeah. And in my conversations with practitioners in the finance space, I've definitely heard things like one of the advantages, if you can even call it anything that comes out of COVID an advantage, was that there was greater collaboration between the credit departments, the finance departments, and the sales teams. I mean, really collaboration at a level that was unprecedented, where in the past you might have seen they were sort of at loggerheads. That the sales teams like, I want to give better deals, better terms, and the credit teams are saying, no, we've got to be more risk adverse, and we've got to make sure that we're checking all our boxes and such. And so they were not always on the same page. But now, with COVID, there was a lot more collaboration that was happening. What makes the most sense? What can we do that's best for the organization to still drive profitability, but also to make sure that our risk is not so great as well. So definitely.
I think that percolates partly because of the fact that probably quite a number of the customer base have dropped off, died, and you've lost a lot of money. And really, your own company, their survivability is based upon healthy sales. So it's even more like the floodlights are on that part of the company right now for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Floodlights, spotlights, just all being shined down on that area for sure. For sure.
We've also had to be more intentional in how we collaborate. Before you could potentially be walking through a hallway and bump into somebody. Now with people being remote, you've got to be really intentional in that collaboration. And I think that's actually helped increase some of the cross-functional communication because we've concentrated on it a little bit more.
Yes, I think that's so true. The intentional. Yeah. You used to be able to just walk down the hall, and now it's like you really have to set a call, make a point of reaching out to someone to have conversations that might have been very casually done before. So excellent point, Jennifer. Thank you. So let's go on to our next question. We touched on technology just a little bit. Maybe we can kind of talk a little bit more about what are some of the more disruptive technology trends you've observed in accounting and finance. And I think, Jennifer, this might be a specialty area for you to kind of give us some more insight in what you've seen, what's been going on.
Yeah, I'm passionate about this one because I work in a technology space, where IoT is becoming, a very big trend that's disruptive. So, for those of you who don't know what IoT is, Internet of Things, fourth industrial revolution, and it's really driving changes in how we do business across a wide variety of companies and industries and functions within a company. So if you think about how things connect, that's what IoT is. From a personal level, it may be how your water bottle, tells you if you've had enough to drink today because it's measuring it, it's getting that data back to you. From a business perspective, it's how devices talk to each other and connect within our systems. So, Gartner is estimating 25 billion connected devices over, the globe by 2025, and that moving to 50 billion by 2030. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of connected things. And so from a CFO's perspective, how do I use this technology trend to get me the information that I need to better run the business? We're getting a lot of data. My company processes 1 billion data events in a month. That's massive amounts of data, but how do we translate that into information? There's a big difference between data and information, and being able to use that information to, better align the company and to improve our processes, to automate our processes, to be able to locate my assets, for example, for audit purposes. and maintenance purposes and operational efficiencies. So there's just a lot of things being connected, and it's definitely a trend that CFOs and finance and accounting people want to make sure that they're aware of and that they're getting involved with early.
Right. And so data is just information unless you can garner the insights that are extracted out of what that data is meaning, what it presents to you, what it's actually going to help you to make a decision, help you to see insights and how to pivot, all those kinds of things. Super important to have that level. Ken or Jack, do you have any thoughts on disruptive technology trends that you've been seeing?
Sure, I'd say during the last 12 months, we've seen an unprecedented surge in cybercrime activity. With the global pandemic, it's introduced new attack surfaces and opportunities for malicious actors. For example, like just some examples: email and internet fraud, identity fraud, theft and sale of corporate data, cyber extortion, and ransomware attacks. Those companies are shut down because of this. So I think that they're seeing the value, the extreme value of making sure that their data is protected and not easily attacked. I'd say that's one of the major disruptive things that we've seen more and more of during the last year or so.
Yeah, it's interesting. It still revolves around data. So from the Jennifer perspective, it's like, how do you gather those insights? And Ken puts the perspective, well, how do you protect your data and the data? You can say it either way, potato, patata, right? Data. But then how do you, it is all around, because to the billions and billions of that you pointed out, Jennifer, I mean, it's just going to get exponentially larger and more that we're not going to see the amount of data decline. It's just going to continue to increase as we keep moving forward with what we call even the fifth industrial revolution, which is the whole onset of artificial intelligence and cognitive systems that we are now seeing are starting to disrupt as well. And this advanced technology that's being created and organically grown, and it's really kind of pushing the envelope of what is possible, especially in the back office, in the Office of Finance. Jack, did you have any other thoughts on technology trends or anything you've seen within this the conversation?
I think one of the interesting expressions that we hear finance leaders say all the time is we're cleaning up our data, or we're cleaning up our data. And really what they're talking about is they're finally adding some structure to that data that they've been collecting. And again, organizations are just really pools of data spread out. And that data, of course, is influencing a lot of the decision making. That's what finance has to do. How do we make sense of this data and help our organization, help those people out there make better decisions? It's really creating a much more agile organizations, another phrase you hear frequently, but it's so true. As more employees, more line managers have more information to make decisions, they're becoming more proactive. And it's something, you can't put your finger on one technology, really. There's a variety of applications helping that data and information being shared, but it's just an interesting time. But when you hear that we're cleaning up our data, that's like a good indication that they're finally adding some structure to something that for too long has gone, just been allowed to grow.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points. Thank you, everyone, for your insights. So now I'm going to move on to another question, because we've talked about remote. We've talked about a hybrid approach. We've also talked about some organizations that are requiring their employees to come back to the office, or maybe even some sectors like manufacturing where some employees they worked throughout because you couldn't run a factory without somebody on the floor at some point. So interestingly enough, do you think from the finance professional's perspective, could they do their job from anywhere? Ken, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, I think we've seen in the last couple of years that so many companies have effectively done this. I think that a lot of finance CFOs were, at the beginning were saying, if the pandemic had hit and people wanted to work from home, I think a lot of CFOs would say, no, not going to go there. But now that the pandemic has hit and people have worked from home, I think they've seen how successful it can be. So I think that I agree that remote work does work, but does have some downside uh, possibilities. For example, the diminished ability of employers or managers to oversee employees. I've already mentioned it before, the lack of creating a company culture together that I maybe it works on the phone. I don't think it does quite as well, but some would say it does. And also ensuring the employees' well-being is taken care of, because so many people have been stressed out at home, working in a new environment with perhaps children around, or whatever their environment entails that is, kind of a little bit detractive from getting their work done efficiently, as well as their mental health has been affected. And I'd say also the lack of collaboration to a degree by working remotely. Um, and I think the worry nowadays from some would be that with remote work, there's a greater possibility of outsourcing your job. As firms emerge from the pandemic and they see how successful it's been with people working remotely, and companies looking for ways to improve their bottom line, um, some of these jobs can be offshored. And this eliminates the full-time benefit concept, as well as office space and equipment, and the minimum wage in other countries. For example, Jamaica's I believe it's $1.86, Philippines $1.85, India's 35 cents. These minimum wages are much different than the United States or Canada. So it's just something to consider as well. And that would be my answer.
So the answer is it's complicated.
It's complicated. It can work. I believe the best thing to do is a hybrid approach.
Yeah, fair enough. Jennifer, do you have thoughts on, can professionals in the finance space do their job from anywhere?
I am a big fan of remote work. I think it offers a lot of flexibility. I definitely agree with Ken that there are some challenges. I think one of the biggest things we hear from people is the company culture issue, and that water cooler conversation. And that does play into people's mental health. And I think one of the things COVID showed us was, having real contact with humans is very important. It's how we're made, and video doesn't cut it all the time. Hybrid is difficult in the sense of if it's on a weekly basis, that means you are paying for the cost of having an on-campus environment or an office location, as well as equipping employees to have their equipment and their things at home. I know a lot of companies paid extra for employees to be able to, purchase things when they move to a home environment. And so having a, hybrid model can, increase costs that way. Some companies are looking for a less frequent hybrid model, using rented space, on a monthly or on a quarterly basis to get that communication. So it varies. It's interesting as I look at some of the surveys, of what employees want. Flexibility is becoming a huge deal. And as employees have had that new taste, maybe from COVID, the numbers are increasing. I think at the beginning of the year, 29% of people on a PwC survey wanted to have full-time remote work at the beginning of the year. That's now up to 41%. As of August of 2021. And so it's going to be really interesting as we juggle, finding people and the ability to outsource. Ken, you mentioned it well. Do some of these jobs shift offshore? Possibly. However, I think what we're going to see is that things become more specialized for the jobs, the finance professional jobs that remain in the United States. It's going to be more strategic. It's going to be higher level thought and analysis more than your routine. So it's growing people to be ready for that trend as well.
Right. And it's interesting too. I heard a funny story about one of the customers I'd worked with, and they said that that having this remote work and having to shift everybody really kind of identified gaps. And one of these gaps being, well, where are the checks being mailed to? And so someone still had to go and pick up the checks that were coming in and the ones that were going to the office. And they were talking about how like they ended up almost having like a clandestine meeting at the park bench where they could drop the checks from the one person to the, be able to pick those up and to scan those in. And then it was like, well, how do we scan them in? All the equipment for doing the scanning for our checks were at the office. So, it makes me think, are there certain functions or aspects of finance that need to have some kind of in office sort of, that's where they're required to be, versus ones that could be more flexible and could be more hybrid? Just from a marketing perspective, right? I work in marketing. There's a creative element that comes from when people get together and get in person that I think, Ken, you talked about it. It's not quite the same to collaborate on a computer, on a screen like this, where even the way that you communicate, where there's more pauses as to who's going to talk first so you don't talk over each other. It's a little different than when you can get in a room and shout out ideas and sort of, there's a little bit more of there's a courtesy to allow other people to talk, because otherwise you can't hear anyone if you're all talking on a phone call. It's a little different, right? Even that interaction between a Zoom and an in-person. So I definitely see that merit of there's an element to the in-person.
And
Jack,
I've seen also that the in-person aspect, if it's only like maybe 1 day a week or something, it's not the same size office as was there before. It's a streamlined office that maybe only has seats for 8 people instead of 50 people or something, and that each department can take a turn booking that meeting room or that space to work from or something. So it's not the same cost, although there's still a cost.
Right. I think that was Jennifer's point, the rise of the sort of the flex office, right? Where you might rent less space. You think about the WeWork, right? Where it could just be,
Right.
You have conference rooms, or you just have a couple
Right.
offices.
That works too.
But then it's interesting too, because then I think about, what about everyone's desk who had the pictures of their kids up and they have their own cubicles with their personalities? You're going to lose some of that aspect if you're always having shared space, where it's got to be, you got to clear everything out in case the next person comes in and what they're going to be able to work in your space. So you lose some of that culture, I think, as well. If you think about these flex spaces, and it doesn't allow for that kind of individualism that can come from an office where you are a dedicated space. Jack, thoughts?
Sure. You know what? It's interesting. I've heard it from both sides, but I think FP&A professionals have found this a difficult environment because, again, discussing collaboration earlier, many of the FP&A people are the people who get embedded or begin building relationships with other part of the organizations where they're, placed on projects and have to build those relationships. The office is where they have done that traditionally. So it's been a little difficult for them, perhaps, as they look to be an effective FP&A partner. The other anecdote recently I thought was interesting, a finance leader, she shared with us how she was somewhat, didn't think necessarily that remote was going to be a good idea for her team. And then she had to hire a new controller, and she ended up hiring him 3 states away. And it had to do with talent. She knew that he was excellent at what he had a wonderful resume. In fact, I think she had worked with him before, so she felt very confident she was making the right hire. But as the remote conversation took off, she became a champion of it, more or less, under the circumstances. So it's interesting as the talent world realities intersect with the remote debate. You get some interesting things happen.
And to that whole point, right? This concept, if you could hire anyone from anywhere, then it really opens up the talent pool that you can tap into for sure. Instead of having it be limited to who can make it to the office or who do I have to move for them to come work for me in my organization, and the expenses that are associated with that as well. So all super interesting points.
On August 17th, Jerome Powell, Federal reserve chair, said I think we know that we're not simply not going back to the economy we had before the pandemic, but it will take time to see exactly what those changes will be. And I think we're even seeing that, day in, day out of, kind of how it's actually how it's gonna pan out.
Mm-hmm.
I think it highlights too the need for finance professionals to increase soft skills, because it is really important in a remote environment to have that collaboration and the camaraderie, and you've got to be intentional about it. And that takes work for some finance professionals. That's out of our comfort zone in general. And so, those types of soft skills, being able to have drive when you're working remotely is difficult for all of us. I find deadlines help. I'm a big deadline person because deadlines make me get stuff done. But having that, personal drive and ability to direct yourself is what's going to help differentiate you from the pack, even in a remote work environment.
Yeah, and I think to the point you made earlier, Jennifer, about technology, and if technology is taking over this clerical type work, then that's going to free you up for a lot more of this relationship building type of work. And to your whole point of having to sort of build those soft skills, I think that is going to be an area in which, as we automate the finance back office, that's going to become more important to have that type of skill set as well for those who work in the organization. So excellent points. Any other thoughts on this? Any thoughts from the audience who'd like to, any comments you'd like to make, or any questions you'd like to ask the panel as we wind down here on our last question? Is there anything else you wanted to hear about or learn about, or had some curiosity that we could possibly respond? If you could just put those questions in the chat, we'd be happy to answer. Final thoughts. I always like to say, like, as we kind of look to what would be, I know what Jennifer's would be, but what would everyone's, like, one thing you would want to tell the audience as the takeaway from what we've talked about here today? Jennifer, if we steal yours and say it's everything you do, but you can't use that one, so you have to come up with something else. So I'll let you think on it. But Ken, let's let me pick on you and just say, if we were to wrap things up today in terms of what's the one takeaway that you think, having had our discussion, you would suggest for the audience to embrace?
Well, first of all, I'd say we're living in an ever-changing environment, and I think the more we're aware of these different issues and these concerns, it kind of makes us think about it more. And each company can deal with this situation in their own unique way. Like, each company is probably going to be a little bit different. They've got employees. Maybe their workforce was totally remote to begin with, so it just gives us food for thought and kind of clarifying, how we can go forward and be successful as company, as an individual company. And I think that there's value in like remote work for sure. That was one thing that is really prevalent nowadays. But I just think companies, CFOs as well as managers, they just want to make sure they get that right mix going forward. To be compassionate to employees, to give them the freedom and autonomy, but whereas not losing anything in the creativity and the wherewithal of having a successful company.
Jack, your thoughts? One sort of golden nugget you would give to the audience to take away from our conversations today?
Just and this isn't just from a recent discussion I was having. I just love the way he phrased this, so I won't name them. But he was talking about, he was a finance leader who was talking about how he was designing a function that would move away from enforcing accountability to creating value digitally across the organization. How do we create value in this digital, with all these new digital tools and what have you? That's sort of what he's tasking, I guess, his finance team, his finance minds to tackle with him. And I just thought it was an interesting way to look at it.
That's interesting. Just to even say, moving accountants away from accountability. That's a tall order. I think it's a good one. I like it. Okay, Jennifer, I stole your best one. So now you got to come up with your next one. What would you say? What's the takeaway you would give to the audience?
We have talked a lot about collaboration and, soft skills and growing yourself, as a player in the game, then doing it as a coach, for your group, and then as a team player across the entire company, getting everybody to work together in a challenging environment is a tall order for CFOs, but I think we're seeing a lot of growth in ourselves professionally, and helping our teams grow and our companies do better.
I actually just had a question that did come in from the audience. I'm going to read it and we'll see how it goes here. But how are you approaching unrealized indirect overspending and keeping vendors and suppliers honest when it comes to overcharging, duplicate billing, tax faux pas, and contract gotchas? So how are you approaching unrealized indirect overspending and keeping vendors and suppliers honest? Jennifer, since this is more of a corporate question, gosh, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one. Is it something that you can, as you think about it, you can share?
Yeah, so you've got to have the internal controls around this, the right people approving the bills. I usually have an operational person who's involved in it, taking a look at it, because finance isn't going to know the details necessarily. So while it does have a finance approval to it, it starts with the operations person. And then there are automated tasks. I know there's software out there that you can use for aggregating and kind of checking across different types of suppliers and vendors to, just make sure that you're getting the best possible results and the lowest possible spend across multiple vendors. For example, sometimes in utilities or in telephone is a big one. Across a company, you've just got so much out there. There are software services you can use to automate and reduce some of those costs when it comes to overcharging and duplicate billing.
Excellent, thank you. Jack or Ken, any thoughts on this one? Or
I would just say on the contract aspect, I was at a company that I read all the contracts before they got fully executed. And I just want to make sure that, most companies, maybe sometimes it's just the salespeople signing, sales manager, or, VP of sales or whatever. But I think you have to have a financial aspect involvement too, to make sure that you really read these contracts so you don't get caught in contract faux pas, as it's put here. It's not just the salespeople, thinking what kind of volume you're getting at what kind of price. Like if they're looking at rebates or anything else or any other contract proposals in there, you want to make sure it's fully vetted before it gets executed.
I'd say just a follow up with that, employee enablement really helps with employee retention, giving people the ability to make decisions. Contracts is not one of them. So contracts, do need to be controlled by the CFO's office or legal if you've got a separate legal department, because you can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you are having your sales team sign those. So I definitely, have clear parameters where they can do certain discounts and, things that gives them the right to, and the ability to make their own decisions. And that really helps. But when it comes to contracts, you've got to be careful with that.
yeah, very true. All true. Very good, true points. Jack, any thoughts on this? Or
yeah, we were speaking recently with a CFO of a large food ingredient supplier. And one of the things he mentioned is that online, he has his team doing a good deal of customer outreach from the finance team or the payables team. When alerting finance team members in real time, he set up this whenever cash is applied to outstanding receivables or credit limits, the whole team is alerted when cash comes in. He was suggesting that in some ways it allowed the customer relationship to be modified or changed in some way. But anyway, again, a lot more visibility into customer accounts.
thank you. Thank you for that insight and interesting. Is there any other, again, as we come up on the top of the hour, any other questions from the audience? we've kind of gone through where the questions I had to put for the panel for today. If you did have any other additional follow-up or questions, I put up there some contact information for the panelists and for myself. Please feel free to reach out if you did have any additional questions. I'll just give it another minute or two to see if any other questions come in for the organizations. Here's an interesting question that just came in. Will robots take away our jobs? I could answer quickly from the top to say that that's not the purpose of a robot. It is to, if we call robots or, this sort of what we might call advanced technology, but it really is to take away the crappy aspects of a job is really what it comes down to. The things that most people don't want to be doing, that kind of repetitious manual work that is really easily done by computer-based software or artificial intelligence. And then you leave the more strategic and sort of collaborative and relationship building type work to the humans. Jennifer, or Jack, or Ken, are robots going to take away our jobs? Thoughts on this?
I hope not. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Jennifer, you're a big proponent of automation, so you certainly don't see it as a threat to take away jobs.
I don't. No.
Yeah.
I think it'll make our jobs more interesting.
Yeah. Easier to do and gives you the best parts of your work to make it sort of elevate the value that you drive towards the organization. So I'm a big proponent of automation as well. So, okay, so I think that just about wraps it up for today. I thought this has been a great discussion. I thank you so much, Jennifer, Jack, and Ken for joining us for these conversations about the priorities, trends, and challenges, what's going on in the CFO's office. We appreciate your coming out and joining us today, and we hope everyone has a great day. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Elaine.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.